The Austin skyline glitters through the panoramic windows of The Summit, a restaurant where the cocktails cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I watch my father Michael raise his glass for a birthday toast, his voice booming with practiced charm. To my daughter Madison, he proclaims a brilliant marketing manager, proving that style and success are in our blood. Madison, my younger sister, beams from across the table the picture of curated perfection. Then his eyes land on me, and to Clara, who proves that even a little coffee dust can't hide our family's good genes. The polite laughter stings. I set down my wine. In that case, I say, my voice quiet but clear, I suppose Madison's success no longer needs my $3,500 monthly contribution. The laughter dies. Madison freezes her smile, wiped clean. My father's face hardens. What did you just say? My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 5 years my world has smelled like coffee. Not the sweet milky lattes my sister Madison posts on her Instagram, but the earthy, smoky scent of raw beans tumbling in a 5-kilo roaster. I built Heartwood roasters from the ground up, starting in a rented garage space with a second-hand machine I bought with my life savings. I remember the first time I hauled a 150-pound sack of green coffee beans from the delivery truck, my muscles screaming, my hands raw. That was my reality. Madison's reality was different. I'd scroll through her feed late at night after a 12-hour day of roasting and packing orders. There she'd be clinking champagne glasses at some rooftop bar in downtown Austin, her caption reading, "Cheers to another successful week, boss babe. The dress she was wearing probably cost $500. The brunch she'd posted the day before with its avocado toast and artfully arranged edible flowers, $50 easy. And I knew with a certainty that settled like acid in my stomach that I had paid for all of it. Every filtered photo, every OOTD post, every effortless smile was funded by my sweat and the smell of coffee dust that never quite washed out of my hair. It started 3 years ago. A tearful phone call. Madison had just lost her job as a marketing assistant and was drowning in credit card debt. "Just for a few months, Clara," she'd sobbed. "Just until I get back on my feet. Please don't tell Dad, he'd be so disappointed." And I, the responsible older sister, the one who'd been programmed since childhood to fix things, said yes. I remembered being 10, helping her with a science project she'd left until the last minute, staying up all night to build a model volcano while she slept. When she got an A, my parents praised her creativity. I got nothing. The pattern was set early. So I said yes. I set up the automatic transfer. $3,500, the first of every month. It was a stretch, a huge one. It meant putting my own plans on hold the new espresso machine I wanted for the roastery, the down payment I was trying to save for a small house. It meant more nights eating ramen, more weekends spent working instead of going out. But it was for my sister. It was what family did. Except the few months turned into a year, then 2. Madison's social media presence blossomed. She wasn't just getting by. She was curating a persona, the Austin socialite, the marketing guru. She'd post about brand collaborations that I knew weren't paying her because I was the one paying her. She bought a new car, a white convertible she claimed was a company bonus. Her feed was a highlight reel of a life she wasn't actually living. And my family bought every second of it. At Christmas, my father would toast to Madison's incredible drive. My aunts and uncles would ask her for marketing advice. "Look at her," my mother would whisper to me, so polished, so successful. "Why can't you find a nice, stable job like that?" A stable job, as if building a business that was finally turning a real profit, a business with wholesale accounts at 10 different cafes and a loyal online following, was just a hobby. They never asked about my revenue, my profit margins, my plans for expansion. They just saw the coffee stains on my jeans and the exhaustion in my eyes and assumed I was failing. The lie became a part of our family's ecosystem, a shared delusion we all participated in. They got to have their golden child their proof that they had raised a success. Madison got to live a life she couldn't afford, and I got the quiet, bitter satisfaction of being the secret benefactor, the invisible engine powering the whole charade. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was just helping family. But standing in my small roastery late at night, the silence broken only by the hum of the cooling fan, I knew what it really was. It was a tax I paid for not being the daughter they wanted. It was the price of peace in a family that valued appearances above all else. And after 3 years, after $105,000, I was finally done paying it. I walked out of that restaurant and into the cool Austin night, leaving the wreckage of my father's birthday party behind me. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't triumph, I felt. Not yet. It was the terrifying hollow calm that comes after a demolition. For years I'd been the silent architect of my own cage, and I had just handed my family the detonator. Back in my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the darkness, the faint glow of the city filtering through the blinds, and I asked myself the question that I knew thousands of people watching this story would be asking. Why? Why did you let it go on for so long? Why did you pour over $100,000 into a fantasy while your own dreams gathered dust? It's easy to judge from the outside. It's easy to say I would have just said no. But you have to understand, I was living in a prison without bars, a cage built not of steel, but of love and obligation and the desperate childhood hope that one day you'll do enough to finally be seen. That hope is the most effective jailer there is. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. You spend your life in a system where your value is measured by your utility to others. You learn that quiet compliance is a form of self-preservation. Asking for attention is selfish. Having needs is an inconvenience. So you become the helper, the fixer, the reliable one. You become so good at anticipating and meeting everyone else's needs that you forget you're allowed to have your own. That $3,500 payment wasn't a gift. It was rent. It was the fee I paid to exist in my family's orbit without causing trouble, the continuation of a role I had been playing since I was a child. And on the other side of that dynamic is the trap of normalized cruelty. You see, in my family's mind, they weren't being malicious. They were just being normal. They had cast their roles decades ago. My father, the patriarch who valued visible success. My mother, the socialite who needed a daughter to brag about. And Madison, the golden child, the one who was born for the spotlight. Her success was their success. It validated their lives, their choices, their status in the community. I didn't fit that narrative. My success was quiet, methodical, and smelled like burnt coffee grounds, not designer perfume. It was an inconvenient fact, a plot hole in the story they told themselves about their perfect family. So they ignored it. They dismissed it. It wasn't a conscious decision to be cruel. It was an unconscious decision to preserve their reality. And my willingness to pay my quiet acceptance of my role made it easy for them. I wasn't just a sister. I was the stagehand who was also funding the entire production. My silence was their permission slip. My money was the fuel for their delusion. For years we existed in that toxic equilibrium. Until tonight. Tonight the stagehand walked off the set and took the budget with her. And I knew, standing there in the dark, that the entire show was about to come crashing down. The chains are only invisible when you don't know you're wearing them. But after that dinner, I saw every single link. And I knew the only way to break them was to let the whole damn prison burn. The silence from my family lasted for 3 days. It was a loud, menacing quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. I spent those days at the roastery losing myself in the rhythm of the work. The roar of the beans in the drum, the sharp crackle of first crack, the sweet, smoky air, it was my sanctuary. I packed orders, updated my inventory, and finalized a new single origin label from a farm in Guatemala. I tried not to think about the phone call I knew was coming. It came on a Thursday afternoon while I was weighing out 2-pound bags of our espresso blend. Madison's picture flashed on my screen, a perfectly filtered selfie from a trip to Miami I had funded last spring. My hands paused over the scale. For a second, the old instinct kicked in the urge to answer, to smooth things over, to absorb her anger and make it okay. I took a breath, letting the scent of roasted coffee fill my lungs, and answered. "Hey," I said, my voice even. "Hey," she replied, her tone breezy, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't sat in stunned silence while I exposed her entire life as a lie, so I was just checking my account. The first is tomorrow. "Did you send it yet?" The audacity of it, the sheer unadulterated entitlement, was breathtaking. There was no apology, no mention of the disastrous party, just a casual inquiry about her allowance. "No," I said. A pause. "What do you mean, no? It's the end of the month. My rent is due, my car payment." "I'm not sending it, Madison." Her voice changed, then the breezy tone hardening into disbelief. "You're kidding, right? This is because of what happened at Dad's party, Clara. You can't be serious. You can't just cut me off. What am I supposed to do?" "You'll have to figure it out," I said, my voice as calm and steady as the pour of beans into a bag. "You have a job. You'll have to live on what you actually earn." "Live on what I—" "Clara, that's barely enough to cover my rent. I have a brand to maintain. I have obligations." "Your brand is a lie," I said, and the truth of the words felt clean and sharp. "And your obligations are not my responsibility anymore. Not this month. Not ever again. You're doing this to punish me. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to ruin my life." The familiar accusation, the one she'd used since we were kids, had lost its power. It didn't even sting. "No, Madison," I said, my voice softening just a little, not with pity, but with a strange, sad finality. "I'm not ruining your life. I'm finally starting my own." I hung up before she could respond. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't menacing. It was vast and open and terrifyingly full of possibility. I had just spoken the hardest word of my life. A single syllable that had untethered me from 30 years of unspoken rules and unwritten obligations. The adrenaline was a hum under my skin, but beneath it there was a deep, quiet click. The sound of a lock long rusted shut, finally turning. I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The shockwave of that no would ripple through my entire family, and I had no idea what it would break in its path. But as I scooped the last of the beans into the bag and sealed it shut, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the family fixer anymore, and I was never, ever going back. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes. The phone rang again, and this time my father's name lit up the screen. The real storm had arrived. I let it ring 3 times, took one last deep breath of coffee-scented air, and answered, "What have you done to your sister?" His voice wasn't a question. It was an indictment. There was no hello, no preamble, just pure unfiltered anger. I told her the truth. I said, my voice quiet. The money has stopped. She is hysterical, crying about being evicted, about losing her car. We're on our way over to her apartment right now to deal with the mess you've made. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us, with this petty, jealous cruelty. Everything you've done for me, the words echoed in the empty roastery. I thought of the student loans I was still paying off from a degree he never asked about. I thought of the $1,000 loan for a car repair years ago that I'd paid back with interest while he bought Madison designer bags for her birthday. This has nothing to do with jealousy, Dad. It has to do with reality. Reality. He scoffed, and the sound was so full of derision it made my stomach clench. The reality is that your sister is a successful young woman building a career, and you're trying to tear her down because you can't stand to see her shine. She's a sales associate, Dad, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. She's a sales associate who has been pretending to be a marketing director while I paid for her rent, her car, and her $50 brunches. Her career is a fiction I can no longer afford to fund. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had broken the cardinal rule. In our family, you didn't speak the unvarnished truth. You danced around it, you ignored it, you enabled the prettier version of it. You never, ever held it up to the light. You watch your tone, he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. Madison is sensitive. She's always needed more support. You've always been the strong one. Strong doesn't mean stupid, I shot back. And it doesn't mean I'm a bank. I've been supporting her for 3 years. I have my own business to run, my own life to build. That little coffee hobby, the dismissal was so automatic, so ingrained, I almost laughed. Clara, this isn't about money, it's about loyalty. It's about family. You are embarrassing us. What are people going to think when Madison has to sell her car? When she has to move out of her apartment? Maybe they'll think she's finally living a life she can actually afford. Maybe they'll think it's about time. This is a mistake, he warned, his voice dropping to a growl. A huge mistake. You've always been difficult, always had to do things your own way, but this is a new level of selfish. You don't turn your back on your family, Clara. You don't just cut off your sister because you're having some kind of tantrum. It's not a tantrum, I said, and my voice was finally completely steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It's a boundary, and it's not up for discussion. He hung up on me. The click was loud in the quiet room. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. I had just declared war, not just on him, but on the entire mythology our family was built on. The golden child, the overlooked one, the supportive patriarch. It was all a lie, and I had just set it on fire. I knew this was far from over. He wouldn't let this go. But as I turned back to my work, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't peace. It wasn't happiness. It was the sharp, bracing feeling of a limb, long numb, finally waking up. And it hurt like hell, but at least I could feel it. The next move came 2 days later. I was in the middle of a cupping session for a new Ethiopian single origin, my senses filled with the bright floral notes of bergamot and jasmine when my phone rang. Dad. I let it go to voicemail the first time, but he called back immediately. I knew this was a conversation I couldn't avoid. I answered, putting it on speaker so I could continue taking notes on the flavor profile. I've been thinking about your little business, he began, his voice laced with a false, patronizing calm, and I think you've forgotten a key detail about how you got started. I swirled the coffee in the small bowl, bringing it to my nose. I waited. That lease, he said, and I could practically hear the smirk forming on his face, the one for Heartwood Roasters. In that very trendy, very expensive East Austin neighborhood, I seem to recall my name being on that piece of paper. Right next to yours. I felt a flicker of the old fear, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. He was right. When I'd signed that first lease 3 years ago, my credit was a joke. I had the savings for the deposit, but no bank would give me a business loan. He had co-signed. It was the one and only time he'd ever financially supported my venture, and he had never let me forget it. It was the guillotine he held over my head, a constant reminder that in the end he still had a piece of my dream. I helped you get that place, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. I put my name, my reputation on the line for you. And a co-signer has certain rights, Clara. A co-signer can make things complicated. I wonder what your landlord would think if he knew the primary leaseholder was in such a volatile financial position she had to cut off her own sister. The threat was clear. He would go to my landlord, paint me as unstable, and try to blow up the foundation of my business. I set my cupping spoon down on the stainless steel counter. The clink was the only sound in the room. Which lease are you talking about, Dad? His confident tone wavered. What do you mean, which lease? The lease for your roastery. There's only one. Oh, you mean the original lease? I said, my voice light, almost conversational. The one we signed 3 years ago. That lease was terminated 6 months ago. Silence. A deep, profound silence that stretched for a full 10 seconds. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background at his house. What are you talking about? He finally managed, his voice a choked whisper. 6 months ago, I was approved for a new business expansion loan. I explained, walking over to my file cabinet and pulling out a folder. My credit is excellent now, by the way. The first thing I did after securing the funding was renegotiate the terms with my landlord. He was happy to do it, given my payment history. We signed a new 5-year lease. The rent is a little higher, but it's solely in the name of Heartwood Roasters, LLC. Your name was removed from all legal and financial ties to this property the day we signed. I sent you a copy of the lease termination agreement for your records. I suppose you were too busy to open it. More silence. I pictured him in his leather armchair, the carefully constructed world of his authority dissolving around him. The one piece of leverage he thought he had the final thread of control wasn't just gone. It had been gone for half a year. He had been threatening me with a ghost. All his power, all his condescending reminders about how he'd helped me, it was all based on an outdated document he hadn't even bothered to read. You have no power here, Dad, I said, and my voice wasn't triumphant. It was just a statement of fact. Not anymore. Heartwood Roasters is mine, the lease is mine, the debt is mine, and the success is mine. You don't get to threaten it. You don't get to touch it. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a king who had just realized his castle was made of sand. The sound of a man who had lost a game he didn't even know he was playing. I have to go, I said, my tone crisp and professional. I have a business to run. I ended the call before he could find his voice. The silence in the roastery returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't just a sanctuary anymore. It was a fortress. And for the first time in my life, I was in complete and total control. I didn't know it at the time, of course. While I was standing in my roastery savoring the quiet victory of my financial independence, another pillar of Madison's life was turning to dust across town. The two events weren't coordinated, but they were inextricably linked, a chain reaction started by that single explosive word, no. I would piece the story together later from a mutual acquaintance who worked at the same high-end boutique. Madison had gone into work that Friday, the day after our phone call, probably trying to project an aura of unbothered confidence. She likely spent the morning arranging displays of $1,000 handbags and greeting the wives of tech executives by name. In her mind, this was her world, her stage. She was the effortlessly chic marketing manager networking and curating. The reality was that her job was to fold sweaters and check inventory. Around noon, the store manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cynthia, called Madison into her glass-walled office. Cynthia had apparently been a fan of Madison's Instagram, but not for the reasons Madison thought. Corporate had flagged her account. Cynthia began her tone clipped. And professional, it's come to our attention that you are referring to yourself in public forums as the marketing manager for this boutique. I can picture Madison's reaction perfectly. A confused tilt of the head, a delicate, disarming laugh. "Oh, that's just for my personal brand," she would have said. "It's an influencer thing. It helps drive engagement. It's good for the store." But Cynthia was not our father. She was not susceptible to Madison's brand of breezy deflection. "Our marketing is handled at a corporate level," Cynthia stated flatly. "We don't have a store-level manager. More importantly, we cannot have an employee misrepresenting their role. It's a legal liability and a breach of company policy." This is where the panic would have set in. Madison would have switched tactics, her eyes welling up with the tears that had been her secret weapon for years. "It was a misunderstanding," she would have pleaded. "I never meant to cause any trouble. I love this store. I love this brand. I can take it down. I can fix it." But it was too late. The decision had already been made. "We have to protect the integrity of our brand," Cynthia said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "And that means we can't employ someone who has been fundamentally dishonest about their position. We're terminating your employment effective immediately." The words, I was told, just hung in the air. Terminated. Not a warning. Not a suspension. An ending. Madison walked out of that boutique onto the sunny, bustling streets of South Congress Avenue, not just without a job, but without an identity. The title she had used as a shield was gone. The employee discount she had used to build her wardrobe was gone. And the salary, the small, inadequate salary that she supplemented with my money, was gone too. In the space of 48 hours, the two pillars supporting her entire fabricated existence had crumbled. My $3,500 monthly transfer and her job, both had vanished. She was left standing on a trendy sidewalk, surrounded by the very lifestyle she could no longer afford, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a phone in her hand. For the first time in her adult life, Madison was facing real consequences. And as I would soon learn, a person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person of all. She had lost the stage, but she still had an audience, and she was about to put on the performance of a lifetime. The quiet lasted a full week. I worked. I slept. I drank my own coffee on my small apartment balcony and watched the sun rise over Austin. My phone was silent. No angry calls from my father. No tearful, manipulative texts from Madison. It was an unnerving peace, the kind you find in the eye of a hurricane. I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just gathering strength. I used the time to lean into the work. The expansion loan had cleared, and I was scouting for a larger warehouse space. The Guatemalan beans were a hit, selling out almost immediately. For the first time, I felt like I was steering my own ship, not just bailing water out of a boat my family kept trying to sink. The hurricane made landfall on a Saturday night. I was on my couch, sketching out a new floor plan for a potential warehouse, a glass of red wine at my elbow. My phone, which had been peacefully silent, suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. Not with calls, but with a flood of Instagram notifications. Mentions, tags, a dozen DMs from numbers I didn't recognize. Then a text from a friend, another roaster in town named Ben. Dude, are you seeing this? Before I could reply, he was calling. I answered, a cold knot forming in my stomach. You need to get on Instagram right now, he said, his voice a mix of urgency and disbelief. Madison is live, and it's a car crash. I opened the app, my thumb, hesitating over her profile picture. I clicked it. The live feed filled my screen. It was a masterpiece of manufactured despair. Madison was in her perfectly decorated apartment, but the lighting was dim, casting long shadows. She was wearing an oversized sweater. No makeup. Her hair. A mess. Tears streamed down her face, leaving smudged mascara tracks. She was holding a mug with both hands, her knuckles white. It was a performance, and she was playing the lead role of the victim. I just don't understand how someone can be so cruel, she sobbed, to the 2,000 people who were watching. Especially your own sister. I've always supported her. I've always been her biggest cheerleader, even with her little coffee hobby. The words were a direct hit, little coffee hobby. She was always in my shadow, you know. Madison continued, taking a shaky sip from her mug. And I guess she just couldn't handle it when my career took off. When I became a marketing director, when I started building my own brand, she couldn't stand to see me succeed. The comments were flying by a waterfall of sympathy. You're so strong, Maddie. Your sister sounds like a monster. We've got you. She was helping me, Madison, admitted her voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She offered to invest in my brand because she believed in me. At least that's what she said. But the second she saw me getting real traction, she pulled everything away, just ripped it out from under me. No warning, no reason. Ben's voice crackled over the phone. She's twisting everything. She's making it sound like you're the jealous, failed one. And then Madison's voice broke with a perfectly timed sob. She called my work. She must have said something, I don't know what, but they let me go. They fired me. Because of her. So now I have nothing. My sister, the one person I thought I could count on, has taken my career, my financial stability. She's trying to destroy me, and I don't know why. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer artistry of her lies. She had taken every single fact and twisted it into a weapon. My support wasn't a bailout. It was an investment. My boundary wasn't a consequence of her lies. It was a cruel, sudden betrayal. Her getting fired wasn't the result of her own dishonesty. It was my meddling. She had painted me as the villain in a story where she was the fallen heroine, and her audience was eating it up. I clicked off the live feed. I couldn't watch anymore. Clara, you still there? Ben asked. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. I'm here. This is insane. People are believing her. I know, I said. I looked at the notifications still flooding my screen. I was being tagged in her post in comments. I was the evil sister, the saboteur. Let them, I said, though the words tasted like ash. Let them believe her. For now. I knew Madison. This wasn't just a spontaneous meltdown. This was a calculated attack. She had lost her private funding, so she was turning to a public court of opinion to get the validation and probably the financial support she craved. But she'd made one critical mistake. She thought her stage was the only one. She forgot that in a story with this many lies, the truth always has a way of demanding its own spotlight, and the questions were just beginning to brew. The wave of sympathy was a tidal force. My phone was a blur of notifications, each one a tiny digital hug for my sister. The comment section of her live stream was a waterfall of heart emojis and supportive platitudes. "We love you, Maddie. Stay strong. Your sister doesn't deserve you." I watched her soak it in her tear-streaked face, a mask of tragic beauty. She'd always been good at this, at commanding a room, with her vulnerability real or manufactured. For a moment, watching thousands of people rally around her, even I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Was I the monster she was painting me to be? Then the first stone was tossed into the placid water of her pity party. It was a comment from a user named ATX Style Watcher. It looked innocent enough. "This is heartbreaking. I'm so sorry you lost your job. Which boutique was it? I want to make sure I never shop there again and support a company that treats its employees so badly." I saw Madison's eyes track the comment. Her expression, so perfectly arranged in its sorrow, faltered for a fraction of a second. A deer caught in the headlights. I'd seen that look 100 times. It was the look she got when a lie was about to be tested. "Oh, I don't think it's right for me to name them," she said, her voice breathy. "I don't want to be vindictive. It's not about them. It's about the betrayal." It was a classic Madison deflection. Frame the evasion as an act of moral superiority. Most of her followers bought it, flooding the comments with praise for her class and integrity. But a few others had seen the flicker too. Another question popped up, this one from Real Talk Austin. "You mentioned your sister invested in you. That's amazing to have family support. Can you talk more about how that started? Was it a formal business loan?" Madison's grip on her mug tightened. "It wasn't formal," she stammered, trying to regain her footing. "It was just her helping me. A gesture of sisterly love. It was a substantial amount, but the money isn't the point. The point is, she used it as a weapon." "How much is substantial?" another user immediately replied. The questions were getting sharper, more specific. The initial blind sympathy was giving way to curiosity. Her narrative had a hook, but the plot had holes, and people were starting to poke at them. Madison laughed, a sound that was a little too high-pitched, a little too brittle. "Oh, guys, I really don't want to get into the boring financial details. It's a private family matter." She was trying to steer the conversation back to the safe territory of her feelings, but the audience wasn't letting her. Then came the direct hit. It was from a user whose profile picture was the logo of a well-known Austin tech company. Her name was Jenna. "Wait, Maddie, I'm so confused. I thought you were the marketing director at Elysian Boutique. I almost applied there last month, but their careers page said all marketing is handled by their corporate office in Dallas. Did they create a special role for you?" The silence was deafening. Madison just stared at the screen. The tears had stopped. Her face, once a mask of sorrow, was now just blank. The gears were turning, trying to compute an escape route from a direct, verifiable contradiction. She had been caught. Not in an emotional gray area, but in a black and white, easily fact-checked lie. "You people don't understand," she finally said, her voice tight with a new emotion, anger. "You don't understand the pressure of this industry. Sometimes you have to project the success you want to have. It's called manifesting." The sympathy in the comments began to curdle, replaced by confusion and skepticism. "Manifesting, you mean lying? Wait, so you weren't the director? Maddie, what's going on?" Her composure, so artfully constructed, was shattering in real time. The cornered animal was about to lash out. Her audience was no longer just a sea of adoring fans. It was a jury. And they were starting to suspect the star witness was perjuring herself. Manifesting. The word hung in the air, a flimsy shield against the barrage of comments, now turning from sympathetic to sharp. "You call lying about your job title manifesting." Madison's face, which had been a carefully composed portrait of tragedy, was now flushing a deep, angry red. The victim mask was slipping, revealing the raw fury of a performer whose audience had dared to question the script. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped, her voice losing its breathy, tearful quality and taking on a hard, defensive edge. "You all sit behind your little screens and judge, but you don't understand the pressure. In a city like Austin, your image is everything. It's currency. You can't get a foot in the door unless you look like you already own the room." The comments kept coming faster now, a digital mob sensing blood in the water. "So you faked it. What else did you lie about? What about your sister? Was she really jealous?" Jealous Madison let out a harsh, bitter laugh that was a world away from her earlier sobs. "Of course she's jealous. She spends her days covered in coffee grounds in some smelly garage while I'm at industry events networking with people who actually matter. She wouldn't know the first thing about building a brand." The pivot was masterful in its own way. When cornered attack, paint the truth teller as the aggressor. But her audience wasn't buying it anymore. The spell was broken. "But she paid for your brand," Write a comment read. "You said she invested in you." That was the final trigger. Madison's face contorted, the last shred of composure gone. "Oh my God, you people are so obsessed with the money. So what if she helped me? That's what family is for. You can't build an image out of nothing. In this world, you need capital to look successful before you are successful. It is perfectly normal to get financial help to build an image that gets you noticed. Everyone does it." She finally stopped panting, her eyes wild. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the live stream. She had said it. Not in a whisper, not as a reluctant admission, but as an indignant, entitled defense. She had confessed to the entire scheme. The comment section exploded. "Oh my God, she admitted it. Screen recording right now. Perfectly normal to have your sister pay for your fake life. Wow. Just wow. Team Clara, this is the most incredible self-own I have ever witnessed." I watched Madison's eyes scan the screen, watched her read the comments, watched the dawning horror spread across her face as she realized what she had done. She hadn't just poked a hole in her story, she had detonated it. The anger in her expression collapsed, replaced by a wide-eyed, stark panic. She was no longer a performer losing her audience. She was a magician whose grand illusion had just vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving her exposed and alone on a bare stage. She fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking. For a second, it looked like she might say something else, try to take it back, try to spin another lie. But there was nowhere to go. There was no story left to tell. The screen went black. The live stream was over. But it wasn't really over. I knew with a certainty that was both chilling and liberating that somewhere out there, a dozen, maybe 100 people had a recording of that final fatal minute. A clip of my sister, in her own words, admitting to the world that her entire life was a performance funded by someone else. She hadn't just lost the argument. She had become a meme. And the internet's memory is very, very long. I woke up not to my alarm, but to the frantic buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications, a digital avalanche that had been building all night. Ben had sent me a link with a single word, annihilation. I clicked it. It wasn't a news article. It was a 10-minute commentary video on YouTube by some local Austin influencer critic. The title was The Great Austin Influencer Meltdown of 2025. And the star of the show was my sister. The clip was everywhere. Her final unhinged minute on Instagram Live had been screen recorded, edited, and set to dramatic music. It was on Twitter, tagged Austin T. It was the top post on the Austin subreddit. A local lifestyle blog, the South Congress Chronicle, had already written a snarky piece dissecting the entire drama, complete with screenshots of her followers turning on her in real time. Madison hadn't just made a mistake. She had become the city's main character for the day, and the story was a tragedy. The professional fallout was swift and brutal. Elysian Boutique, the store that had fired her, posted a cool professional statement on their Instagram story. "We are a brand built on integrity and transparency. We do not condone misrepresentation of any kind. It was corporate speak for. She's not our problem anymore." A small local jewelry designer Madison had collaborated with posted her own video looking genuinely hurt. "I feel so betrayed. I thought she was a real marketing professional." But it was the social collapse that was most devastating to watch. The same group of polished, beautiful women who populated the background of Madison's brunch photos were now the ones sharing the clip in their group chats. One of them, a woman I recognized from Madison's feed, even posted it to her own story with the caption, "Some people will do anything for attention. So sad." They weren't just abandoning a sinking ship. They were helping to drill the holes. I scrolled through it all with a strange sense of detachment. There was no joy, no triumphant. I told you so. It was like watching a building you knew had a faulty foundation finally, inevitably collapse. It was a mess, a tragedy, but it wasn't a surprise. My phone rang. It was my father. I hesitated then, answered, bracing myself for another round of anger of blame. But the voice on the other end wasn't angry. It was hollow. "I saw the videos," he said. "Just that. Dad." I started, but I didn't know what to say. "The things she said," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "The things people are saying about her. That boutique," they posted a statement. He trailed off. "I called her. She won't answer. Her phone just goes to voicemail." He sounded lost. The booming certainty was gone. The patriarchal anger was gone. All that was left was the confused, heartbroken voice of a man who had just watched his entire perception of his daughter be publicly executed. He had built his pride on the foundation of her success, and that foundation had just been revealed to be a Hollywood set. "She'll be okay," I said, though. I wasn't sure I believed it. "Will she?" he asked, and it was a real question. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my father sound like he didn't have all the answers. I have to go." He hung up. I put my phone down and walked into my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window. I measured out beans for my morning pour-over, the familiar ritual, a comfort in the chaos. As the hot water hit the grounds, the rich, honest scent of coffee filled the air. It was the smell of something real. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, whatever wreckage was left to sort through my world, was finally blessedly built on solid ground. Madison had been the star of her own show, and the show was without a doubt over. While the digital world feasted on the carcass of Madison's reputation, my world became quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, eerie calm. I went back to the roastery, to the familiar scent of burlap and burnt sugar, the comforting roar of the drum. I didn't check the blogs or the comment threads. I didn't need to. I had heard the crash, and now I just wanted to focus on the silence. The work was a balm. It was real. You couldn't fake the perfect first crack. You couldn't manifest a flawless flavor profile. It was just beans, heat, and time. Honesty in a bag. 2 weeks after Madison's live stream, an email landed in my inbox. It wasn't from a family member. It wasn't from a blogger wanting the inside scoop. The subject line was simple. Partnership inquiry, Whole Foods Market. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. I read the email 3 times, my eyes scanning the corporate letterhead, the polite professional language. They had tried our espresso blend at a cafe in South Austin. They were impressed with our sourcing ethics and our flavor consistency. They were launching a new initiative to feature local, artisanal producers in their regional stores with the potential for national distribution. They wanted to set up a meeting. Whole Foods, the holy grail for any small batch, ethically sourced product in Austin. It was the kind of validation I had barely let myself dream of. My little coffee hobby, the thing my father dismissed and my sister pitied, was being courted by one of the biggest specialty grocery chains in the world. I thought of my father's birthday dinner, of Madison's pitying glances. I thought of the $105,000 I had poured into her fantasy while my own reality was struggling to stay afloat. It wasn't a loud, angry victory. It was a quiet, profound validation that settled deep in my bones. I had been right. The work mattered. The quality mattered. The truth mattered. Weeks bled into a month. My life became a blur of spreadsheets, logistics, calls with distributors, and meetings with men in suits who, for the first time, looked at me not as a girl with a hobby, but as a serious business owner. We signed the contract, a 6-month trial run in all 34 Texas stores. If sales targets were met, we'd discuss a national rollout. I leased a new, larger warehouse space, a cavernous building that echoed with the promise of what was to come. I was standing in the middle of that empty warehouse one afternoon, a tape measure in my hand, trying to visualize where the new, larger roaster would go, when I heard a car pull up. I glanced out the big roll-up door. It was a ride-share, a beat-up sedan, and the person who stepped out was someone I barely recognized. It was Madison. But it wasn't the Madison from Instagram. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or high heels, just jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was pale, stripped of its usual layers of makeup, but it was her eyes that were the most changed. The practiced confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, hollowed-out desperation. This wasn't a performance. This was what was left after the stage collapsed. She walked slowly toward me, her steps hesitant on the dusty concrete floor. She stopped a few feet away, just looking at me, at the vast, empty space around us. "Clara," she said, and her voice was a sound I'd never heard from her before, small, fragile, and completely broken. I don't know what to do." I looked at her standing there in the cavernous space that represented my future, and I felt nothing. Not the hot, satisfying rush of victory I might have fantasized about, not the cold pity I might have expected, just a vast, quiet emptiness. This was the end result of all her choices, all her lies. A hollowed-out girl standing in an empty room, asking for a map because she had finally run out of road. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't list her betrayals. I didn't lecture her on the consequences of her actions. Words were her world, a world of captions and comments and carefully crafted narratives. My world was different. It was a world of action, of physical work, of tangible results. So I acted. I walked over to a hook by the door where a few spare aprons were hanging. They were simple, made of thick brown canvas, a little dusty from the construction. I took one down. It felt heavy in my hands, real. I walked back to her and held it out. Madison just stared at it, her eyes wide with confusion. "What? What is this?" "An internship," I said. "It starts now. It's unpaid." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "An internship, Clara. I need money. I need help." "You've had help," I said, my voice even. "You had over $100,000 of help. It built you a castle of sand. Now you're going to learn how to build something on rock." She looked from the apron back to my face, searching for a hint of sarcasm, a flicker of cruelty. She found none, and in that moment, watching her, I understood what I was doing. This wasn't forgiveness. Forgiveness felt cheap, an easy way to let her off the hook, to let myself off the hook. And this wasn't revenge. There is no joy in watching someone you once loved completely break. This was something else. This was justice, but not the kind that punishes. It was the justice of a sower. There's the justice of the storm, which tears things down to pay for past crimes. And then there's the justice of the seed, which demands you build something new from the barren ground. I couldn't undo what she'd done. I couldn't erase the years of being made to feel small, but I could force her to face the one thing she had spent her entire life avoiding: real, honest work. The truest consequence for a life built on illusion isn't poverty or shame. It's reality. I don't know how to do any of this, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know, I said. No one does. At first, slowly, her shaking hand reached out and took the apron. It looked foreign against her simple t-shirt, a costume from a life she couldn't imagine. She fumbled with the ties, her fingers clumsy. I didn't help her. I just waited. When she was done, she looked at me, her eyes full of a terrifying, uncertain emptiness. What do I do? I pointed to a push broom leaning against the far wall. You start there, I said. The floor needs to be swept before the new roaster arrives on Monday. She stared at the broom, then back at me. For a second, I saw a flash of the old Madison, the defiant, entitled girl who believed some tasks were beneath her. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the blank slate of someone with no other options. She walked over, picked up the broom, and started to sweep. The movements were awkward, inefficient. The sound of the bristles scraping against the concrete echoed in the huge, empty warehouse. I watched her for a long moment. The fallen influencer, the golden child, covered in a fine layer of dust, learning the first, most basic lesson of building something real. It starts on the ground. It starts with cleaning up the mess, and it's a job you have to do yourself. I turned and walked back to my office, leaving her to the silence and the work. The scent of coffee would come later. First, you had to clear the floor.